Thank you for joining us in Globe Hall today. This event is part of the Frank Islam Athenaeum Symposia series. I'm Dr. Fiona Glade. I'm Dean of Communication Studies, English Language for Academic Purposes, and Linguistics, and curator of the series. I spend most of my time here at Germantown campus, but I'm really happy to welcome folks from all three of our campuses and from the community. So for those of you who are still in college, this one will be familiar. For those of you who aren't, doing a little throwback here. If you're sitting near the back, please move closer to the front. This is going to make things so much nicer for the conversation that our speakers will have. So I know some folks are still arriving, folks are getting out of class or coming from somewhere else. So come on, shuffle on down. I want to start with a grateful acknowledgement of the native peoples on whose ancestral homelands Montgomery College sits, and for the vibrant tribes who are still here today. As the Athenaeum recognizes Black History Month, our events this year are exploring the theme of social justice and community wellness, very timely topic. Today's presentation by Gail Jessup White and Leslie Green Bowman promises to be an exciting contribution to the theme. 2 or 3 times each semester, the Athenaeum series brings in experts in international affairs, social sciences, the humanities, arts, politics, and many other topics. You can find more information about the program and view recordings of previous speakers by visiting the Montgomery College Athenaeum website. This event is being recorded and will be available on the website soon. So please turn off your cell phones and turn off all of your screens. Before we go on, I'd like to recognize the work of a few colleagues who made this event happen. Our TV producer, Mr. Peter Pereira, he's up in that little box there. Ms. Vivian Chang, who coordinates the admin, and our 2 amazing Athenaeum faculty fellows, Professor Katima Lee from English, and Professor Amanda Miller from Art, both from Germantown. At the close of the panel discussion, Professors Miller and Lee will facilitate a Q&A session. You can see the microphones right here. So if you have questions for the panelists, please hold on to them because there will be time to ask them. Now, I'm delighted to hand the podium to our host, Vice President and Provost Interim of Germantown Campus, Dr. Mohamed Kainemouи.
Thank you very much, Fiona. It's good afternoon and welcome to the Frank Islam Athenaeum Symposium Speaker Series. It's wonderful to see each and every one of you here in person today. My name is Mohamed Kainemoui, and as Fiona mentioned, I'm the interim vice president and provost of the Germantown campus and the college-wide STEM unit here at the Montgomery College. As the provost, I have the privilege of welcoming you to this beautiful campus for an event that is sure to get us all thinking about our nation's history, particularly as we celebrate Black History Month. You're likely aware that February marks Black History Month and provides our country the collective opportunity to recognize sacrifices and contributions of African Americans who helped shape the nation. But do you know when and how February became known as Black History Month? As an educator, I can't help but to share a brief history with you. In 1926, Dr. Carter G. Woodson and the organization he co-founded established Negro History Week, a week dedicated to promote and educate people about Black history and culture. The second week of February was selected as the birthday of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. Both American symbols of freedom fell within it. Over the next several decades, week-long celebrations began to spread across the nation, as did protests around racial injustice and inequality. Then in 1976, the country's bicentennial, President Gerald Ford established the first official observance of Black History Month, urging Americans to, and I quote, seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. Since President Ford's proclamation, every American president has designated February as Black History Month. If you are interested in learning more, check out our blackhistorymonth.gov, a wonderful website put together by Library of Congress and several of their incredible national partners. Now I'd like to introduce Mr. Frank Islam, our generous donor and a good friend of Montgomery College. A successful entrepreneur and a philanthropist, Mr. Islam has led thriving businesses since 1994 and currently heads his own private investment holding company, FI Investment Group. He is a founding member of the board of Maryland India Business Roundtable and the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council, recognized by the US Small Business Administration as the Small Business Person of the Year in Washington, D.C. metro area in 2001. He has received numerous industry awards recognizing his leadership, entrepreneurship, and excellence. In addition to his popular blogs in the Huffington Post and the Medium, Mr. Islam has authored 2 books, Working the Pivot Points to Make America Work Again, was published in 2013, and Renewing the American Dream, a Citizen Guide for Restoring Our Competitive Advantage, published in 2010. Mr. Islam has demonstrated a special commitment to civic, educational, and artistic causes. He serves on a number of boards and advisory councils, not only in civic life, but also in higher education. These include the Kennedy Center Board of Trustees, the Woodrow Wilson Center, the Strathmore, and the Brookings institutions, as well as my school, Johns Hopkins University, the American University of Afghanistan, and the George Mason University. And of course, he holds a special place in our hearts as the generous donor for this Athenaeum Symposium series. In his lifelong contribution as an entrepreneur and civic leader, Frank Islam has worked in his own word to create opportunities that are sustainable and uplifting for humanities, guided by virtues of hard work, focus, equality, innovation, and kindness. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me recognize Mr. Frank Islam.
So my job is to introduce my 2 dear friends, Gail Jessup White and Leslie Bowman. And I've known Leslie for many, many years, as we are the member of the cabinet, Debbie. By the way, I want to recognize my wife, Debbie, and our niece, Krista. That's Debbie's niece. So she's a dear friend because we have known her for a long, long time, and she will do a great job here as a participant as well as a speaker. And Gail, good to see you. So good afternoon. Thank you, Mohammed, for your kind and fine introduction. I should have you everywhere for my introduction. You do a good job. It is my pleasure to be with you and all of the participants at this most important Athenaeum Symposia gathering. I say most important because we're here today not to hear about history as an abstract exercise, but to learn about the past so that we can create a more just society and better communities for the future. To enable us to do this, we are blessed to have Leslie Green Bowman, my dear friend, who is also the president of the Thomas Jefferson Foundation, and Gail Jessup White, the first public relations and community engagement officer of the Thomas Jefferson Foundation, engaged in a conversation filled learning into tough history at Monticello. It is my privilege and honor, I would say, to introduce Leslie and Gail. Let me do so beginning with Leslie. As I said, Leslie is the president of Thomas Jefferson Foundation. The foundation owns and operates the UNESCO World Heritage Site at the Monticello, the home of our founding father, Thomas Jefferson, in Charlottesville, Virginia. You know, I love Thomas Jefferson. For almost 15 years, Leslie's work here had advanced the foundation's vision of bringing history forward in ways that include and create common ground for all Americans. During the tenure, she multiplied the donor base sixfold, bringing in more than $20 million in donations. Thank you, Leslie. Well, I should have her as a part of my foundation so she can help us. Leslie recently announced that she will be leaving the foundation at the end of the April. Lonnie G. Bunch, who I've known very well, the Secretary of the Smithsonian said, and I quote, Leslie Bowman's commitment to ensuring America better understands the historic and contemporary impact of slavery changed the trajectory of not only Monticello, but of other historic homes and plantations. Her courageous leadership helped all to see the complexity of Thomas Jefferson and the certainty of the slavery in the lives of many of the founders of America. We were all made better by her time in Monticello, end of quotation. Leslie's work through the years have not been just confined to Monticello. She last served on the Committee for the Preservation of the White House under 4 presidents. Since she has also served as a trustee of the National Trust for the Historic Preservation and a board member of the Art Museum Directors Association. Leslie earned her Bachelor's of Philosophy from Miami University in Ohio and an MA in Early American Culture from University of Delaware. She is the author of American Arts and Crafts, Virtue in Design. Now let me turn to Gail, whose bio provides a perfect complement to that of Leslie. Gail Jessup White is the Thomas Jefferson Foundation's first public relations community engagement officer. She earned her BA in communications from Howard University and master's from Northwestern University. Gail is a longtime community activist. She began her professional career at the New York Times and went on to become an award-winning television reporter and anchor. She has also taught at Virginia Commonwealth University. Gail is the author of Reclamation Sally Hemings, Thomas Jefferson and Descendant Search for Her Family's Lasting Legacy. She's a direct descendant of Thomas Jefferson on his father's side and a great-great-great-granddaughter of Peter Hemings, Sally Hemings' brother. Well, wonderful, Gail. We're blessed to have you. In her book, Gail describes the years she spent on painstaking research into her connection to Thomas Jefferson after hearing family stories and lore since her early teens. After 4 decades, when she was named Media Fellow at the Robert H. Smith International Center for Jefferson Studies, Gail discovered her family lore was correct. Publishers Weekly, in the review of her book, said, "The Reclamation is a powerful call for reconsidering Jefferson's legacy and centering the Black experience in American history. This spirited memoir charts a hopeful path for a more honest reckoning with the legacy of slavery." In closing on Gail, I should note that she's the first ever descendant of Thomas Jefferson and the family he enslaved to work for the foundation. Given those background, I'm certain that you will agree with me that Leslie and Gail are the perfect pair to share this conversation in which they will lean into the tough history of Monticello. If you guys have never been to Monticello, you should go there. It's a fantastic place. I'm confident in doing their learning, they will offer us an authentic and inclusive view of the Monticello's tough history and what we can learn from that history in order to continue to build more socially just society here in the United States and the world. Leslie and Gail, it has been my honor and privilege to introduce you. The stage is yours. The mic is yours. Let's go. Let's go with your conversation.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it is we who are proud and honored to be here. Hats off to you, Frank, and Debbie for establishing this impressive event, which has honored us. We also want to thank Dean Fiona Glade and Vice President and Provost Mohammed Kinamoui. Thank you. A little bit about our format, and then we're going to get started. As you can tell, we each have interesting perspectives on similar story and a joint story. So I'm going to talk for a little bit about Monticello's history with leaning in. Then Gail's going to tell her story of how she came to be part of Monticello and always had been part of it, but didn't always know. And then we're going to get into conversation. And we don't know where that's going to go. And we don't know where your questions are going to take us. So I just want you to know we're really open. We believe in dialogue. We believe in learning and engagement. We believe in suspending judgment. Gail and I have known each other for 8 years, and we have become close and trusted colleagues.
And it took work.
It took work. It took work. And we believe in disagreement. We believe that sometimes we need to listen to one another and unpack the assumptions and the prejudgments that might be making us think we don't agree. And sometimes we don't agree, but we almost always can find some common ground. And I guess I'd say, isn't that what all of us need to be doing in this country as we, the people, shape a more perfect union? So
Some of that might happen here right before your very eyes, by the way.
it's okay, even on videotape. So as Frank mentioned, you know Monticello as a historic house. We're also a world-class research institute. Frank mentioned the Robert H. Smith International Center for Jefferson Studies, where Gail was first a fellow in our fellowship program. The ICJS, as we affectionately call it, has led conferences about Jefferson and his world in 18 countries on 6 continents. It truly is international. And each year we welcome about 25 research fellows, usually for a month or two. Your fellowship may have been a month.
A month, yeah.
Sometimes longer, depends on the topic. But of those 25 annual research fellows, and some of them could be you, students, graduate students, almost a third of them are international. So Jefferson is one of the most internationally known of our founding fathers. I was in Australia when a cab driver was like, "Oh, Jefferson, oh, the best founding father." Like, okay, great, good to know. I was on a flight to China and the pilot came back. It's a little disconcerting when the pilot comes back, but I know somebody else was flying the plane, and he figured out who, I was with a trustee at the time, and he said, "You work at Monticello? Oh my God, let me show you something." And he pulls down the Jefferson Bible from the overhead where his bag was. So we have friends and foes around the world. Jefferson, we don't feel that our job is to worship Jefferson, and we don't feel our job is to defend him. It's to try to help ourselves and everyone around understand his role in history and what his legacy is and how we've been impacted by that legacy, both good and bad, right? And that's some of the tough history that we have pledged ourselves to lean into. We are also a museum with galleries, exhibits, a film, But maybe more importantly, and really why Gale became connected, is we are one of the largest oral history archives on slavery outside of the WPA. So we are in touch today with almost 1,000 descendants of Monticello's enslaved community. We've conducted nearly 200 interviews, oral history interviews, and that work just got a $3.5 million infusion grant from the Mellon Foundation to continue and to expand. And so we're particularly proud of that work, and that work is really how Gale became connected with Monticello. We are also gardens, we're a nursery, we're a trail, but maybe most importantly for this conversation, we're a site of human bondage. Thomas Jefferson owned 607 human beings through the course of his life, and he freed, the number varies as to how you interpret it, but he freed or let go free 11 out of 607. In 1987, we were among the early sites in America to be designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in partnership with the University of Virginia's Academical Village, the historic core, which Jefferson also designed. And we were deemed a masterpiece of human creative genius. But equally important to us at Monticello was 2017, when we applied for and were designated an International Site of Conscience. So you see right there what we tackle every day at Monticello. Annette Gordon-Reed, one of our board members, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian of Gale's family, the Hemings family, says we're the best and the worst of America. You come to Monticello and it's all right there. The best of who we are as a people and the worst of what we haven't fixed yet, right? So we take those designations, both as a site of conscience and a UNESCO World Heritage Site, extremely seriously. We feel we need to live up to them every day. And that means we do nothing without academic rigor and research. We actually are a serious academic institution. I mentioned the fellowships. We are editing with Princeton University the papers of Thomas Jefferson. We have, I don't know how many PhDs on staff. I'm not among them. I respect them and salute their work. And on that scholarship relies so much of the work we've been able to do. You can't tell the stories if you haven't found them. So it's been 60 years of archaeology on that mountain to find the sites of where enslaved families lived and worked. And because if you think about it, of course, we have letters from our white ancestors, but many of them were not allowed to. It was illegal to be literate. It was illegal to let a slave be literate in Virginia. Now, Jefferson let his enslaved people learn to read and write quietly, but we don't have letters. We don't have paintings of people. We don't have the record in material culture. And the only way to find that is to find it through white people's references, right, the dominant society, or to go underground and find the artifacts, find the implements. We actually know the diets of some of these sites, because if we can excavate with the technology we have now, we know a lot. Because Jefferson was such an extraordinary place of great beauty. Because Jefferson was such an extraordinary, academically inspired individual himself. We have his papers, which are amazing in their detail. But we also have, as I mentioned, archaeology. We have his writings. And we have the oral histories that I mentioned. This project is growing, and it has really changed Monticello in many, many ways. So I want to start by saying, if you came to Monticello in the 1960s or 70s or even 80s, I think it's safe to say it was a racist institution, like a lot of institutions in Virginia. I came in 2008. Gale came in 2016. A lot had changed by the time both of us came. I would not say that it was intentionally racist anymore. As early as 1993, the archaeology started even earlier to learn more about slavery on the mountain. There's a wonderful historian named Lucinda Stanton, known as Cinder, who devoted her work as a historian at Monticello to the plantation and the enslaved people. And every lecture we give on this, we should honor Cinder, who really, really began the tide of academic inquiry. But we were a racist institution If you came and asked about Sally Hemings in those days, you were told, if you were not ushered out, you were told that there was no truth to that story. The guides, who were often the junior league ladies of the community, would refer to enslaved people who worked there as servants. And there was not a mention of the word slavery. Now that certainly had begun to change in the 60s and 70s and through the Civil Rights Movement, but I want to own that past. We have to own our past if we're going to bring it forward and learn from it, right? And successive staffs at Monticello, and we stand on their shoulders, Cinder particularly, made it their life's work to begin finding out and to begin uncovering the stories of those who had been erased. So I arrived in 2008, and we opened, it was already planned and about to be finished, a new visitor center in 2009. And that was, I think, a watershed moment, because that was the first time slavery was talked about in every aspect of those exhibits, in the film. Slavery was talked about in every tour inside the house, although I have to tell you, standing inside a Palladian villa and talking about slavery is often a disconnect for people. And so we knew then that people only spent maybe 20 minutes at the visitor center. They were spending much more time on the mountain, which was the main event. And we knew we needed to restore the physical, visual proof of a slave plantation. This wasn't a McMansion up on a lovely hill with that beautiful view that I showed you a moment ago. This was a place of human bondage. This was a plantation slavery site. And so that requires money. And we started setting about to raise that money. And at the same time, Frank was kind enough to quote Lonnie Bunch. Lonnie and I had lunch not long after I arrived, and he was then the founding director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And we shook hands at that lunch and said, we're going to do an exhibit on slavery at the Smithsonian. It's going to be on the mall. And it was the first exhibit, I think, ever done on slavery that put human names and faces and people. And it wasn't an exhibit about the institution of slavery. It was about your ancestors. It was about 5 families who intermarried and worked and labored for Jefferson's happiness and for this country. And that exhibit opened in 2012, and it was seen by almost 1 million people on the Mall in Washington. It was at the American History Museum. As you know, that the African American History Museum had galleries in American history before they had a building. And then we traveled it to Atlanta, to St. Louis, to Philadelphia. We brought it home. We still thought it was an incredible assemblage of artifacts, so we stored it. And 5 years later, the country was in a very different place, and we decided to bring it back out and put it on national tour again. And it toured Dallas and Detroit and Richmond before the pandemic halted its progress. But during that tour, it raised a lot of national awareness, and it also helped us raise money. And in 2013, we were able to start a project that we called the Mountaintop Project. So we raised $35 million to restore the mountain to what Jefferson would have recognized, with the slave dwellings and the workshops right 100 yards from his bedroom, with the workshops under the house restored to where they were, and with Sally Hemings' room restored as well into an exhibit. This is a tree planting on Mulberry Row, which is sort of the industrial main street of Monticello, in 2015, when we had just completed restoring one of the cabins that the Hemings family, one of the Hemings family members lived in. We completed the Mountaintop Project in 2018, as we opened the room where Sally Hemings lived. And then we began focusing not on restoring physical vestiges of our history, but inviting dialogue about it. So since 2016, we've hosted 3 major national public conversations. You can look them up on YouTube, you can look them up on our website, and we're gonna talk about a couple of those, because we had you open our first one. Along the way, what we realized was, and I remember saying this to the board when I was talking to the board about leaning in and the risks. We're going to talk about risk too, if you'd like. I said, okay, I'm really glad you want us to do this work. And have you noticed I'm white? I need help. And most of the board at that, not all, we had a few African Americans on the board then, we have more now, said, we need help. You know, if it's about us, it can't be without us, say young people. And we had the same attitude about these changes we wanted to make at Monticello. So we reactivated our advisory committee for African American Affairs. We relied on strengthening relationships with our Getting Word descendant community. That, of course, includes Gail. We assembled a young advisors group for an audience we wanted to hear from. We also relied on our African American community, where Gail has done amazing work to engage us much more closely with our own Black community. We relied on some wonderful consultants here in Washington, Joshua Dubois and his Values Partnerships team. I can't not recognize the board for their courage and their risk-taking ability to realize that we were going to lose donors with these decisions, and we did, but they were going to stand tall on this truth with us, and we also gained new donors. But the best part of all, I have to say, the people who did the greatest work, it wasn't I who raised all that money, and it wasn't I who made all those changes. It's an amazing staff at Monticello, and no one more than Gail Jessup White. Over to you, Gail.
Thank you, Leslie. That was a wonderful overview, and I learned something. So you just got a great recitation of what Monticello's done over the past several years. And part of what we've done is to incorporate the narrative of enslaved people. People want to hear stories. So when I came on board, I came on with decades of a story. And it began right here in this area. I'm from Washington, D.C., when this city was predominantly Black. I went to Howard University. I see there are no graduates of Howard in here, otherwise we would be hearing HU. You know. That's okay. And at that time, it was called Chocolate City. So I grew up with a very solid id. I felt really good about myself. I felt privileged. When you grow up and you see people who look like yourself, and it's a professional class, it's a government town, everyone has a good job, you can feel good about who you are. However, when I was about 13 years old, you spoke of documented history, I heard an oral history, because that's how the word's passed. That's why our project's called Getting Word. The word is passed down orally about my family that shocked me and changed the course of my life. That was a long time ago. I heard my oldest sister say to my dad, let me back up. First, let me describe to you my oldest sister. She's 20 years older than I am. She's tall, she's statuesque, she's very beautiful. And I'm a frumpy 13-year-old girl. She'd been living in Asia, in Singapore specifically, for 2 years, where her husband was covering the war in Vietnam for Time magazine. My sister's visiting us. She's in her 30s. She's elegant. Her hair is pulled back in this beautiful bun. She's got these beautiful long lashes and red lipstick, and she's talking a mile a minute to my dad. And in exasperation, I leave for a break to the kitchen to get a snack. And I hear my sister say, with all her drama and flair, and I said, I'm descended from Thomas Jefferson. Well, you can imagine how I was shocked to hear about that. So I go to my sister and my dad, and I ask for more information. My sister was at the American Embassy in Saigon. Everyone was white, aside from my sister and her husband. This is in the late 60s. I'm really that old. Everybody, please sound shocked. And the guests were speaking of their heritage. And they were speaking of great pride as if they were descended from royalty. And my sister took great offense to this. We're Americans. Small R Republicans, small R Democrats. So she decides she's going to outgun everybody. She stands to her greatest height with her swan-like neck, and this is when she makes the announcement. Well, I am descended from Thomas Jefferson. And that's what I heard her say. I already described to you, I'm a Black girl growing up in Washington, D.C., a very solid id. I could not imagine how I could have been descended from Thomas Jefferson. So I go to my dad. He's the most trusted person I know. Very smart man, Dunbar graduate. And I say to my dad, is this true? And my dad, 6'2", red hair, freckle-faced. Does this sound familiar to anyone? With an aquiline nose, aside from this little hump in the bridge, says to me in his very reserved pattern, Gail, that's what they say. Again, red hair, freckle-faced, tall, white-looking man. I eventually pulled from my dad, who was also a reserved man, but his mother was from Charlottesville. So when I learned that, I thought there must be something to this oral history. I would add to this story that this history was passed down from my grandmother, who would have been the Jefferson descendant, from my grandmother's half-sister. The family called her Aunt Peachy. I never knew her. She was gone by the time I came into my parents' world. Aunt Peachy was a domestic. She worked for a very wealthy family here in Washington. Aunt Peachy could not read, write, or even spell her own name. But she knew with great pride that her half-sister and her half-sister's children were descended from Thomas Jefferson. So it meant something to her, and it meant something to me. Growing up in DC in that era, 60s, 70s, we weren't taught about slavery. I went to a Catholic school, St. Francis de Sales, now closed. We weren't taught about our history. This is what Monticello is doing now. This is why we're leaning into this tough history. I didn't know that Jefferson owned people. To this day, people come to Monticello, and they're surprised to hear that Jefferson owned people, and they don't all want to acknowledge this. They don't want to absorb this information, but we give it to them. When I first started visiting Monticello, and I'm going to skip over the decades of trying to trace this story because you may read it in this book. I would encourage you to go to Amazon and pick this up. When I first started visiting Monticello, and I came late because I was in school, I was raising a family, I was a reporter, I had things to do, so I didn't get there until a few years ago, a little less than 20 years ago. And I would go on the tour, and every time Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson came up, because at this point I assumed I was descended from Sally Hemings, my imagination didn't allow me to go anyplace else. I would raise my hand, and the tour guide would sort of brush over it. Even just a few years ago, the guides would brush over it, and I would raise my hand, and I would say, I'm descended from Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, just as my sister rose to her greatest height at that embassy party and said, well, I'm descended from Thomas Jefferson. I would raise my hand. And the guides would say, oh, sure you are. And they would keep going. And I would go back repeatedly, same thing. Oh, sure you are, and keep going. Well, in 2010, I went with my son. My son's tall, broad-shouldered, very brown-skinned, very good-looking black man. Kid at this point, but I go with him. And I'm not that tall. I'm looking up at my son all the time, and we're on the tour. And we do the same thing. I do the same thing. Look at me, I'm descended. And we're descended. And the guide said, I think it was Miss Marshall, I've learned. The guy said, you're dignitaries. You're family. Let me take you on a private tour. Let me take you to the dome room, which at that point was closed to the public. Mm-hmm. And again, a life-changing moment. I was 13 when I first heard the history. I spent many years trying to extract more information from my dad. He was a very taciturn man and very reluctant to discuss his past. Most of his family was dead. They died when he was a child. So here I am, finally at last, being introduced to Cinder Stanton and other staff members on the Getting Word Oral History Project that would change the course of my life. I was living comfortably, hanging out with my good-looking, smart husband in Richmond, Virginia, having a good time. And Monticello came calling. And my ancestors came calling. They had a job for me to do. They had a story they needed to be heard. I'm a writer, a former journalist, recovering journalist, I like to say. And I became their voice. I'm getting in my rhythm now. Somebody's going to have to shut me down. Because when I start speaking, it's no longer Gail Jessup White speaking. It's my 4 times great aunt, Sally Hemings, speaking. It's my great-great-grandmother, Sally Robinson, speaking. It's my 3 times great-grandfather, Peter Hemings, speaking. It's the number of families, and I have 3 families coming through that Wales-Jefferson-Randolph line. They're the ones speaking to you today because they're the ones who sacrificed so much, whose lives were marginalized by another one of my ancestors, Thomas Jefferson, my 5 times great-grandfather, through one of his great-great-grandsons, a man named Moncure Robinson Taylor. They're the ones who had phenomenal talent and skill, which they managed to use, because what I tell people when they come to Monticello as often as I can, this was the home of the enslaved people. We need to see that as their home as much as we see it as Thomas Jefferson's home. They built that place. If you walk along the building, on the west side of the building, you can see the fingerprints of children's markings in the bricks because they made the bricks. John Hemmings did much of the woodwork at Monticello. Pride they had in their work. And there were families there, and they loved each other. In the exhibition that Leslie described, you will see toys and instruments. Do you know why? Because these were human beings. They found joy and strength and stability in the worst institution man has created. And that humanizes them. And that's what they want us to hear, that they were human beings. And it's because of them that I'm here today. It's because of them that I was a student at Howard University where my dad went to school. It's because of them that there are professionals in my family. It's because of them that we were able, and we have been able, to have the first Black president of the United States of America, and that a Howard University graduate is vice president of the United States of America now. It's because of them, and they want us to know that. So we lean into this history, and sometimes it's hard to hear. Trust me, I adore Jefferson. Jefferson's DNA is in me, but I had to acknowledge that this man enslaved people. And he could have made a difference. He could have changed the course of this country, in as much as hearing the stories from my sister changed the course of my life. And he didn't do it. To use a phrase that we use now, he wouldn't have. He kicked the can down the road. Nonetheless, what else did Jefferson do? He gave us the Declaration of Independence. And how many movements, let me back up, how many people enslaved at Monticello heard those ideals of freedom and incorporated it in their own lives and pursuits and passed it down to their children? We have descendants who were active in the civil rights movement. There's a man named William Monroe Trotter, who was a trailblazer in the early part of the 20th century, a descendant of Monticello. We have a history going back to Thomas Jefferson, the enslaved families, some of whom became conductors on the Underground Railroad, moving into the 20th century, founding organizations, moving into the mid and later 20th century. To this very day, we have a descendant on staff, one of my cousins, who's now director of the Getting Word Oral History Project. We're going to give Thomas Jefferson credit for writing the words, but we're going to give Black Americans credit and other marginalized groups of people for using those words and making them their own.
Let's give her a hand.
Thank you. Thank you. I can take this as a cue because I can go on and on. But it's important for me to convey to you that it's the narrative of the people. It's the voices of the people. They want to be heard. And when you come to Monticello and other institutions in this country, you will hear the voices of those people and recognize them as the human beings and the successful human beings that they were, and thank them because they want to be thanked. Thank them. And thank you.
So now you know why when we met Gail Jessup White as a potential staff member, we'd met her as a fellow working on her family's history, and when she applied for a job, she and another woman were closely tied for that job. Both were African American. The job was actually the manager of the Getting Word Oral History program. We thought, we have a better job. We gotta do a better job than that. So we actually created the community engagement position for Gail when we met her. And we hired the other woman to do it, right?
Yes, we did.
And you and that other woman were two of the first African American salaried positions at Monticello. And that's hard. Gail writes about that in her book. So I want to talk a little bit about risk.
Sure.
Risk to come to an all-white seemingly all-white institution that is predominantly about white history, right? The risk at Monticello for leaning into this and getting some real blowback from donors or primarily white people who don't want that history told. Annette Gordon-Reed talks about the fact that when you say the word slavery, it sucks the air out of the room. People don't hear anything else you say. And we can actually document that. I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole here, but we are often accused of, all you're talking about is slavery. It's slavery, slavery, slavery. And I get the nasty notes, and we get the editorials. And we take this so seriously, right? We by the way, we don't have docents. We have paid professional guides. Bringing history forward is a professional position at Monticello. And we don't leave it to chance. Our guides do a year of training before they're allowed to take a tour. And they have ongoing training. And we now actually have started taping, audio taping, and technologically measuring what topics are mentioned where and how often, so that we can refute the claim that all we talk about is slavery, right? So there has been risk in this work. Do you want to talk a little bit about having everyone in the room turn to you and say, well, Gail, what do you think African Americans will want to do? And what did you say to me?
Well, this is where Leslie and I began learning from each other because, again, Monticello has this history of being a white place and then the foundation of white place. And Nye Bates is the other woman who came on when I started. And often we were the only Black people in the room around white people who hadn't had a lot of experience in diverse environments. And I would say simply, we're not a monolith. I can't speak for all Black people. And I think that fell on really ears that were willing to hear that. And that was part of the challenge of being at Monticello, because there were times, and Leslie, you know this, I'm not telling you anything new. There were times when I felt tokenized. When questions like that were asked of me, there were times when I felt I was brought out to be on display because I was the descendant. And having grown up the way I did and feeling very solid about who I was, I didn't know how to handle that. And I fought back. And this is where a lot of tension emerged because I was constantly fighting back because I always felt that I had to defend not only myself, but defend people who were misunderstood. And I was having to explain all the time, I can't speak for all Black people. I'm not a monolith. You can't use me to represent or to give you, to legitimize the work you're doing here. It has to be real work. And that was heard. And today we have a pretty well-populated professional class. We have our HR person who's Black and some people in education are. I don't feel alone. I don't feel alone anymore. And these conversations have helped me not feel alone anymore because it took work and it took some, oh gosh, sometimes I really felt that I overspoke, but I still have a job, so it must have been okay. And we landed here. I think this is the first public event we've done such as this last week.
Well, when we launched your book. Yeah.
Oh, when we launched the book, yeah, oh, that was fabulous. That's when I knew it was okay because they did a great book launch for me in Monticello.
The other risk, though, if I can
No,
pull it,
please, this is a conversation.
you know, there's a lot of risk with your board and with your donors, right? Is everybody really willing to stand on this truth? And it's one thing in the boardroom, and some of you who are board members, you know this. It's another thing at the grocery store or the cocktail party. What the is going on up there? We actually had every single staff member, volunteer, and board member, we asked them to have training in Sally Hemings' story before we opened the exhibit. Because I knew in the boardroom and on, oh yeah, this is great, this is wonderful, this is, but I knew what they would encounter in their social circles, right? And there was so much fantasy about the Sally Hemings story, right? Oh, well, they really loved each other, didn't they?
I hate that one,
yeah,
by
so
the
on the
way.
one hand, he's raping her, and on the other hand, they were madly in love. How do you deal with that as an institution devoted to truth and history? We hired a firm out of Montreal, there's a Canadian right there, to design what we did in her room. And I say that because it was the first time Monticello, in the historic confines of the architecture, did not do a period authentic reconstruction. What was it going to tell anyone to see a cot and a trunk and a fireplace? How was that going to convey Sally Hemings' story? And do you know what Sally Hemings really should be known for? Instead of being the concubine, the words of the period, concubine to Thomas Jefferson, she got her children freed 50 years ahead of emancipation because she, at 16 years old, stood up to one of the most powerful white men in the country. And so rather than create a period room, well, that's where she slept, and that's where she was allowed to live with her 4 children. Being allowed to live with your children was a huge benefit then. I'm not going to go on and on about Sally Hemings. You can read about her on your website, and we'll have a little film clip here. But the point of that room was to tell a story, and to tell it only with primary documents. How do you do that with an enslaved woman who left us no letters? We took the words of her son. And when the exhibit designers in Canada wanted to, embroider it and bring in, script writers, I was like, nope, we are an academic institution. You will only use the words of her son and what we factually know. We put outside on text panels what we know, and we asked the question outside on the, we didn't shy away from it. This was another risk, right? And we had to put it so many inches high so that children under age whatever couldn't read those words. Was it rape? Was it, abuse? Was it love? We shamelessly put those words in the text panels because we don't know. And what we want to do with our history is bring forward what we know and let you all decide what you make of that history and how it affects you and your family, right? So it's been risky. We lost a multi-million-dollar donor, and we've gained some. It's been fascinating to watch how the first donor and I've been in the museum career for obviously many years. The first time I ever got a $500,000 check from a donor who had never been to Monticello, never met us, lives in New York up the Hudson, read about our work when we finished the Mountaintop Project and sent us a $500,000 check. So sometimes, risk has its rewards.
And I'd like to add, too, with the Sally Hemings exhibition, we went out to the community. That was my job, community engagement officer. And we elicited from them their impressions of the exhibition as well. And that was important because we built really good relations with the people in the Charlottesville area who up until that point really had resisted Monticello because of what it represented, because of the inequality of the power that we're literally on a mountain represented to everybody else. And we were so well received because of that. And that was the other big effort that you made in encouraging us to, again, lean forward into what until that point had really been anathema. We weren't doing it. And to ask people in the community, and this were Black, when I say community, I'm speaking Black community, let me be specific. It made them, allowed them a voice, again, and to feel included in what was happening. And we listened to what they were saying, and if there had been something in there that would have been offensive to that community, we would have changed it. We would have changed it. And I think that took courage and guts too, because we were no longer being the Bigfoot. That's, if you know about the journalism industry, that's a word we use in journalism. We stopped being a Bigfoot and started listening. And that's what makes the difference. My dad, who worked for the federal government, was an appeals examiner, an HR exec, and he said, listen, please. And that's what we started doing, listening, please. And I think that's what we're going to do now, right?
We started listening with our big first public conversation. This is 2016. Gail has only been at work at Monticello for probably less than 6 months.
Oh, yeah, it was like a month. I just arrived.
I want to place in your mind 2016. This is before Charlottesville in 2017. This is before Charlottesville becomes a verb and a noun for something horrible. But we were midway through the reconstruction of the landscape of slavery, and we had a public summit called Memory, Mourning, M-O-U-R-N, Mourning, and Memorialization, Legacies of Race and Freedom in America. And it included John Meacham, Melody Barnes, Skip Gates, Annette Gordon-Reed. You can see some of those folks here. You can also see how we integrated the arts into it. One of the things we've learned as an interpreting institution about history, you have to engage people's hearts as well as their minds. If you really want messages to resonate with people, they need to grab them in multiple levels. And they also need not to be talked at, like we're talking at you, so we're gonna stop soon. How many more minutes do we have? 5 or 10. So we integrated the arts into this day, and we had 2,200 people register. We had to find the biggest tent in all of Virginia. We had television screens. It was an amazing dialogue, and it was clear to us that leaning into history and making connections with today was very, very important to our community. And you opened the program.
I did. I opened the program with my mentor, Cinder Stanton. It was a marvelous day. It was very moving. I spoke of that being my ancestral home. It was the worst hair day of my life, but no matter. It was significant, and it was a milestone for Monticello because we talked of, first of all, we faced head-on Thomas Jefferson and his culpability in the way we have to live today and what he could have done to make a difference. And we acknowledged the strength and the character and the endurance and the tenacity of the enslaved people and their contributions and that of their descendants. So it was a very moving moment. And Skip Gates, who's a friend, had very positive things to say about it, as did everyone who was involved, because it spoke honestly. And that's hard.
And speaking of honesty, I promised you'd find out a little bit more about what we did in that 12 by 14 windowless room under the house where Sally Hemings was allowed the benefits, the special privileges of living with her children. And let's just hear a little bit.
I just want to say, this is such a moving exhibition in its simplicity. And Leslie mentioned it earlier, and I encourage you to come see it because this is a lovely clip, but you really need to be in that space. And one of the things I like to tell people about Sally Hemings, who throughout history have seen her as an appendage of Jefferson's or as a victim, is that she was actually a very strong, smart woman. As Leslie said earlier, she negotiated with one of the most powerful, and she said white men, I'll just say men, because in America, the only men who were powerful at that
Fair
point
enough.
were white. Privileges for herself and freedom for their unborn children. She did it when she was in Paris with only her brother to accompany her. No one to advise her aside from her brother. I don't know if she knew anybody there. Nobody can possibly know that. Do you know what that took? She should be an inspiration for us. She was a phenomenal woman. You're nodding, Fiona, because we know. She was a phenomenal woman. And so I'd like to hold her up as a hero and someone from whom to find inspiration and courage because that's what it took. And she made a better life for herself and for her children, and they passed that down. She was a true, heroic American, an American.
Another room that really speaks to you is this one.
Yeah, and I know
we
we're running out of
restored.
time, so I'll just say briefly, very briefly. In 2018, we opened the Sally Hemings exhibition along with some other exhibitions, including a kitchen, the original kitchen there that for 200 years was covered. Jefferson had it, and his enslaved people covered it up, and after they built a new kitchen there, a new, more modern kitchen. And this is where my ancestor, Peter Hemings, who was a cook and a broomer, described as diligent and intelligent by Jefferson. And he and his brother worked together, one man to remain enslaved until 1827, the year after Jefferson died. The other one, his brother James, also in Paris with Sally Hemings, to be freed because he too negotiated with Jefferson. So that space is really sacred ground for me. When I go there, if I need comfort, I often go into that space and to the graveyard, which has really been recently rehabilitated, which is
We're gonna
beautiful.
Talk about that next. This
Yeah.
is just an image from our 2018 opening. And the man on the far right is John Meacham, but Darren Walker was so moved by that opening. He later told the Art Museum Directors Association when they asked him what the most memorable museum experience of his life was, he described this day. And we aren't even considered an art museum. It's like, yes, Darren. And it was because of Darren that we were able to do some really important work with the graveyard and with an event this past year. This is a reprise of the Paradox of Liberty exhibition that we had started in 2012 at the Smithsonian, and then we sent it back on the road, and now it's an online exhibition that you can view. This is the burial ground that Gail is referring to. It had been surrounded by asphalt and a parking lot in the 1970s at the parking area at Monticello, and it was only saved because of an oral history
That's
of an
right.
asphalt company worker who remembered and said, no, wait, there are graves here.
It was a black person, by the way. That's important part
It
of
was
the
a black
story.
person.
It'd been passed down from generation to generation to this black man that there are people buried there, is the language I heard was used.
And to Monticello's credit, they stopped
They did
the
stop.
work, and they did the
did.
archaeology, and it was proven true. And from, I don't know how many decades, it was maintained much as it would have looked in the period, but that appeared really run down to our audiences today, especially when you go up on the mountain and see Jefferson's graveyard. So in 2019, and we got interrupted by the pandemic, we started a project to really overhaul, renovate, and give sanctity. And thanks to the descendants who really led the design process, we hired architects with you all saying that's who we want. I was so touched that they wanted the public to understand this place. They could have said, it's ours, we want it protected, we don't want to be goldfish in a bowl. But in fact, you wanted it to be a place for Americans, all Americans. And so this is a little bit of what it looks like today. And then this past Juneteenth weekend, we opened, we didn't open, we dedicated that graveyard. And Darren Walker, that's why I brought you back to that story, wanted to read, he said, I want to do another public event like you did in 2018. And so we brought an amazing group of people together on Juneteenth weekend to dedicate Gail's families and other enslaved families' ancestors buried at that burial ground. And what you see Gail there talking up there on one of the panels. And you see here a very famous Black artist, Titus Kaphar, who, with the support of the Mellon Foundation, we were able to borrow some of his works, but we particularly wanted to borrow the painting you see right there installed in Jefferson's parlor, because the painting is called Jefferson's Farm Book. This is a painting he had already done. He didn't do it. He did do some paintings for us that weekend, but this was one in his portfolio and famous for, because what he's done is he's quoted Jefferson's Farm Book, which you saw it on the screen in the Sally Hemings exhibit, lists the names of every slave that Jefferson owned. And he did a portrait describing how that farm book appeared to him. And he put a man with a face and hands of tar into a period manor-born portrait. And so for Juneteenth weekend, we installed it in Jefferson's parlor. And that was risk that hit us, because we then got torn apart by the far-right press that we were trashing Jefferson and that we were all about slavery. I would do it again. It was not a permanent installation. It was Juneteenth weekend. All of our guides understood. We never got any pushback from visitors, but we did get pushback from the press.
I'd like to add this too. Oh, go ahead, this, and then I would like to add something.
Well, why don't you add if it's about that weekend?
So that weekend, Ascendant Weekend, and the weekend of 2018, also Juneteenth, when we opened the exhibition, there were also reunions for the descendants of the enslaved. In 2018, it was the largest reunion of its kind in modern history. 250 people were there on the West Lawn. And we had an equally
400.
large number, a larger
No, we had
number, a larger
400 this
number.
past June.
In 2022. 2022. So the wonderful work continues, including the descendants of the people who were enslaved there. It's really important to note that at any given time, there were always more Black people in Jefferson's time. There were always more Black people in that space than there were white people. That's why the book is called Reclamation, because it's important for those of us who have been marginalized and disenfranchised to reclaim the work that our ancestors did and to be recognized for it.
What we're working on now and what we're going to open Juneteenth, so it's that week, it's a good time to come down, is what we call a contemplative site. And it has the name of every person enslaved by Thomas Jefferson. And the ground is broken. They're installing it now. They're water jet cutting every name. And we've also left room for names we don't know now that we will find. And we've located it on the mountain inside the UNESCO, not quite visible from Jefferson's house, but just below that West Lawn, Nickel View, in the grove where Jefferson had his pet trees. And it also looks out then into the fields. It's the color of the clay the enslaved workers worked. It's the color of the brick. It's the color of the iron in the iron workshop that's nearby.
And the descendants were very huge in contributing to the design of that as well. Mm-hmm. We have been included in this process of growth at Monticello, and again, leaning into that tough history.
So we're going to wrap up. We invite you to come. We invite you to engage with Tough History to help us make it stronger, to help us find more accurate information. I will say that this article, this past couple weeks, was a real moment for me. When we started this work, for me in 2009, really, I never thought we'd be written up as a Black travel destination. So this was a moment when a few of us just went, oh my goodness. That means more to me in some ways than an 8-figure gift, because it's from the Black community. It's not from a donor who's white saying this is good work to do. This is real endorsement. So we're going to end with a reminder of Jefferson's perhaps greatest accomplishment. He gave us the words that have allowed people to become free all over the world. And Dr. King invoked this document and called it a promissory note on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Lincoln himself quoted it. and a promise of equality in the Gettysburg Address. It's been used by Gandhi, it's been used by Nelson Mandela, it's been used by the sisters of suffrage, in the women's movement. We know there were flaws in this document. As we move towards 2026 and the 250th anniversary of this document, we want at Monticello to be a place of conversation about what it meant then, what it has come to mean, and what we as Americans can make it mean as we shape the nation we want. And if I left you with any message, I would say it's on all of our shoulders to make those promises real. And I want to thank the descendants and Gail's family for their help with that work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just wow. Phenomenal work, inspiring words, and I really want to honor the work that you two do, Leslie and Gail, and also the voices. Those voices, Gail, that you've invoked today. Let's not forget. We do have a few minutes available for questions now. Professor Lee and Professor Miller can help with that if anybody needs the mic brought to them. Otherwise, please take a place at the mic and go ahead and ask speakers your questions.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for being here. And Fiona is probably not surprised to see that I'm standing here. I teach communication here at Montgomery College, and so stories are extremely important. Narratives are extremely important, and so you both, that resonates so powerfully with the work that you're doing. I don't even know if you can answer my question, but I just need to say it. When is America gonna get over itself? All of the lofty dreams and assertions and things that we sprout, when are we going to allow ourselves to get there? To be a more perfect union, to tell the truth. Okay, I appreciate all that you talked about with risk, but I kind of want to say to those people, the hell with you. Just take the risk and tell the truth, because that is who America is, warts and all. I spent Sunday at the Native American Heritage Museum. The effort, concerted effort to eradicate people. That's what America has done. And of course, we're talking about enslaved people. We know what America's done to my people, to our people. So again, I don't even know if you have the answer or how do we get started. The work that you're doing is getting us started. But folks in this country, we got to get over this country has to get over itself. It is not a great country if you don't tell the whole damn story.
What's your name?
Stacy Peterson.
Stacy, you're absolutely right. And if you look at what's happening in Florida right now, we need to watch closely what's happening in Florida right now, because that man, we're not going to talk politics, but that man could become president of the United States. And he wants to shut down, first it started out with African-American AP courses, now it's all AP courses. He wants to shut down the LGBTQ community. If we don't stand up with a voice like yours, the voices of the people in this room and people like us, then we will lose whatever we've accomplished. Let's look at the Supreme Court right now. That should be scaring the heck out of everybody. I am a little tired of the fight because we've been at it a long time. But for the young people in this room, take the mantle and run with it. Because if you don't, we're going to lose our democracy. It's at risk. We all know it. I've had people say we should just break the system up and start from scratch. I don't think that's a good plan.
I'm just going to say, I think each of us has to answer that question. It isn't a question for someone else. Every single person who cares about America has to look inside for the answer to that question. Because it isn't they who are going to answer it, it's us. And it's what each of us is doing in our own lives, whether it's how Gail and I have learned from tough conversations, good intentions, often not good outcomes, because we had to listen and we had to think about what we were saying and triggers that we didn't understand in each other. Everybody has to own that question first, and then we'll get answers. That's my own quick, off-the-cuff, heartfelt response.
For me, as a person from a marginalized community, I think we have to confront. I was about to say, I don't think we need to break the system, but we have to confront the system, and we have to discard the evil in the system.
And we have another question.
And we have to fight. No, you know, I can get started now. Stacey, I wish you hadn't done this. Because we have to, as Frederick Douglass said, agitate, 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 and then some. I'll add to that, and then some. Otherwise, we're going to lose. Thank you.
I just want to start by saying how commendable your work is you're doing at Monticello. I look forward to a very different visit the next time, which will be soon. Are any other sites, historical sites, doing what you're doing, or are there plans for other sites to take this and let's move forward with it? I hope to see that other places are doing what you're doing. And do you know of any?
Absolutely. And some are, I wouldn't want to paint this as Monticello was leading the way for everyone. Everyone has their own story and their own work. Whitney Plantation, and now I'm forgetting which southern state it's in.
Louisiana.
Louisiana, is one of those old, traditional white southern plantations that only interprets the enslaved lives there. It's very moving and very powerful. Montpelier, James Madison's home, has been, I think, equally committed and devoted. I would say one of the reasons Monticello has gained perhaps more prominence and profile, not just because of our UNESCO, but because under the surface of public awareness for decades, we were doing the work to find the stories, to find the material culture, to find the history. In Jefferson's documents, in other documents, under the ground. That work takes time. So while I think it is possible for a lot of sites to do more, for years they just said, well, we don't know their names. Well, find them. We just got a $3.5 million grant because we don't think we know enough. We have scoured most of our primary document and archaeological material from the mountain, but why aren't we out looking at census records and church records and school records? And that's how Andrew Davenport, the current director of the Getting Work Project, thinks he may have found the lost daughter of Sally Hemings and Jefferson, Harriet, because Harriet passed into white society at 21 when she was freed.
Uh-oh, this is new information I hadn't known. I didn't know this.
See?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not ready for prime time, so you didn't hear from. But we need to do more. But I think all of these sites that you're asking about, I think there is a groundswell to tell a more honest story, but then they've got to find the stories to tell. So, I mean, I think they're being more open about their history with slavery, but there is work and effort and rigor that goes into finding those stories and finding the ancestors. I think UVA has now begun an oral history project patterned on the one that Monticello started 30 years ago. 1993 is when Cinder Stanton founded the Oral History Project. So I'm not saying that they're 30 years from any progress by any means. Don't take that. But it is hard, relentlessly important work. And thinking about risk, knock on the door in 1994, and you're a person who's descended from ancestors in slavery. Why would you tell your story to a white historian standing there saying, I'd like to know more about, your family's history with Monticello? It took years to build trust.
And she worked with a black woman,
She
woman
knew,
named Diane
Cinder
Swan
knew
Wright.
she had to have the endorsement of a black historian, right? So it's hard work, it's committed work, and I think there is a lot going on, and I think you'll hear more and more. Great question, thank you.
And I'd like to add, because I got a little fired up and a little bit.
Down, girl, down.
These are my views, and I feel very strongly about my views, and I will express myself. There's no one who can stop me from expressing myself. But they're my views. Monticello is apolitical. We lean into this history and we tell the truth, but Monticello is not Republican, Democrat, Independent. Gail Jessup White is somebody else entirely. And I will speak for myself under all circumstances. It's just who I am. But it needs to be made clear that when I start doing the Power Fist, it's not Monticello, it's Gail. Thank you. You're welcome.
First, thanks, ladies, for coming out here to our community, and I appreciate it. I'm actually from Buckingham County, down 20,
Yeah.
in your community.
Yeah.
Right? And I would just want to give you guys your flowers because I grew up seeing the difference in Monticello over, I was born in 76, so about 40 years now. And only recently, and they're being honest, only recently were they being honest about the Hemmings family. I remember my grandmother telling me back in the day, oh, well, Thomas Jefferson had kids from a black family. And I thought, yeah, Grandma, those are just stories. I thought those were go with the Brer Rabbit stories. Then, so it was really nice to find out later that those stories were true, and now it's more embracing. My question, outside of giving you guys your flowers, because the community definitely loves it, the other thing I would ask is, are you guys doing another Juneteenth celebration this year? And if you do you have a date?
We were talking about that date on the drive up here. We are, and we're going to open and dedicate the copper, it's not copper, it looks like, it's a Corten steel ribbon wall with the names pierced. And the completion date is supposed to be late this spring so that we can commemorate it for Juneteenth. And the only reason I hesitate on the date, and this is another risk when you're Monticello and you're kind of one of the larger attractions in a small community, we don't want to step on our Black community's calendar of events for that weekend. And I say that with some experience that, yes, we have done that unintentionally, but we also have different audiences, so we need to be exquisitely sensitive to get the date right so that the parade at the African American Cultural Center, the Jefferson School, isn't impacted, so that so we're trying to be really inclusive with our community as to how. So watch our website, but it will be somewhere close to that Juneteenth weekend, if not on it.
And I would add, too, there's something called Black Cville. If you go to blackcville.com, BLKCVILLE, did I say I was in journalism? .com. You can get a listing of Juneteenth events. I mentioned Black Cville because this is a group that we worked intentionally and conscientiously with to build a rapport within the Black community and to extend beyond our borders what we have to offer, not just at Monticello, but in Charlottesville, which is, despite what happened in 2017, a wonderful place to visit. And so I would encourage you to do that to learn more about Juneteenth events.
Okay, if there are no other questions, please join me again in thanking our speakers. This was an outstanding